Okay, well, welcome to the Academic Data Science Alliance Open Research and Open Scholarship SIG meeting. We're here to talk with April from Reproducibility for Everyone. I'm Steve Van Tile, the Community Manager with ADSA. And I'm going to hand the reins over now to April and we'll get things started.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. And welcome everybody, whether you're tuning in now live and I see your name there, or whether you're watching later on YouTube. Today, I'm really happy to talk about one of my favorite projects I've been involved with in my career so far, and working on reproducibility education, and it's called Reproducibility for Everyone. So what I'm going to share my slides. Does that look right? Okay, let's clear up some space here. So there's always a little bit of moving windows around. Okay, so what we're going to talk about together today is a little bit about how we got to what we're doing right now in Reproducibility for Everyone, what we do, how we do it, who's involved, and then also talk about, the ways that you all can get involved if you're interested. There's little things, there's big things, and we welcome, little contributions and big ones. So Reproducibility for Everyone, in short, we're a community of researchers, and we focus on running workshops, introductory workshops on reproducibility to increase the discovery and adoption of reproducibility tools and methods at scale. So we're focusing on big groups and reaching, many, many researchers. So we're community-led. Everything that we do has been decided by the researchers involved in running the workshops, including myself. We started in earnest around 2018. We have about 40 active volunteers right now, but over the last couple of years, we've had many. We probably have over 100 volunteers at some point come in and out of the project. And we've run 49 workshops so far. I put 50 because it's like, come on, I'm gonna have another one next week. So the other thing that I think is unique about our community is that we're very international. We've run workshops on 6 continents. Our volunteers are from 6 continents. Because we're focusing on scale, we're reaching participants with our workshops in the thousands so far, even though we've only been around, as a mostly part-time, initiative until recently, for only a few years. So one of the asks, I was going to plant the seed. If anyone here knows a researcher in Antarctica, I want to know them so that we can change that to 7 continents. So I'm going to dive into this sort of narrative about reproducibility for everyone, but I just want to say that feel free to ask questions in the chat, and feel free to unmute and ask a question as well, since we're not a huge group. And since we have a whole hour together, I think it would be easy for us to, accommodate questions as they go along. Sound good? Awesome. So I'll start with a little bit of how did I get here? How did I get to joining Reproducibility for Everyone for helping to organize this group? My background is in epidemiology and statistics, and I became interested in the barriers to reproducibility and rigorous science early in my career. So since 2014, I've been running workshops on these topics: transparency, open research, reproducibility, rigor, these sorts of things. Most of the workshops that I've been running since 2014 have been fairly long. And I think probably many of you have been, involved in a reproducibility workshop in some way in your career as well. Maybe you attended one, maybe you ran one, and a lot of them are fairly long. You have 3-hour workshops, pretty standard. That's what Center for Open Science does, usually 3 hours. And then you have the carpentries, which are like 2-3 days long. So that was the norm for what I was doing as well. We mostly ran them at universities and research institutions. often organized through the library, which I'm sure for those that run workshops, that sounds familiar to you as well. And the participants that we got in those workshops were amazing people. They were mostly students. They were mostly early career researchers. We didn't often get people that were later in their career in those reproducibility workshops. The other thing that I noticed is that they were often filled with people like me and you, people that care about reproducibility already. Something happened that made them care. Either they read something or they're just interested in it in general. And so what we often had in our workshops were people that were not naive to these issues. They already had a little bit of information, and they were coming in many ways more for social reasons than anything else, to meet other people at their institution that were also interested in the topic. So we had a room filled with people who were already advocates, who were already enthusiasts, who were already started that lifelong journey of learning how to improve their research. And we usually had like 30 or 40 people in a room, because if you're doing a lot of hands-on stuff, if you're doing a lot of live programming and that sort of thing, that seems to be like about a natural cap for people in the room. The other part of the content that I was often running, and I still see this a lot in reproducibility workshops, is the content itself is focusing on best practices. It presents a very idealistic, here's what an ideal researcher would do to achieve the ultimate reproducible workflow. And oftentimes, because of our own interests, we would fill those workshops with really innovative, exciting new projects, new ways to publish, new tools, which are great. But what ends up happening is that a lot of these workshops were quite aspirational. They were presenting a workflow that didn't really exist in the real world in any real numbers. So that was sort of the work that I was doing. There's nothing wrong with that, but it sort of led me to see some, I would say, some gaps, in training. So what, I wasn't alone in this. A few of my colleagues that I was working with at the time, back in 2017 and 2018, were seeing the same thing. We were seeing that we were leaving the majority of researchers behind. We were often speaking into echo chambers, rooms filled with people that already cared and were working on reproducibility in their workflow. And that the majority of researchers that you meet that were not attending the workshops, they didn't know anything about the tools and the methods that we talked about. And they were completely naive to, these ideas, these concepts, and maybe the importance of why they would even want to start doing programming for their statistical analysis. Why would they even care about sharing their data? Why would anyone want to use their code? They're very fundamental things that the majority of researchers have never had any sort of introduction to, why they should even, try out these new tools and methods. There also seemed to be a gap in really short introductory workshops that could reach large groups of people. Because if you're doing a lot of interactive, hands-on stuff, you can't teach 300 people at once. So we thought there was maybe room for there to be more of these sort of overview workshops that were more here's the landscape, here's how to start your journey of lifelong learning. And we also wanted to think again about what are the topics that actually will have the most impact in an individual researcher's ability to reproduce their own work and reproduce their colleagues' work. So we started thinking about what content actually benefits a researcher immediately and with the smallest amount of change in their workflow, and have that rooted in actual researchers' experience and not just theory. Because a lot of us that are really interested in reproducibility, we have a lot of theory, this tool will theoretically, change how people, do their analysis or something, but it might only be adopted by 100 researchers and it's not being used in the real world. So maybe, but we don't actually have that as a We don't have that experience. It's just theoretical. So what we wanted to do with Reproducibility for Everyone is make an introductory workshop that can reach hundreds of researchers at once, that doesn't focus on the innovative, sexy, aspirational, ideal practices, but instead comes from researchers themselves who have tried something out and said, you know what, this thing helped. And then that is, something that we hope we can bring more people to discovering, these concepts and these tools, and to start on a pathway of lifelong learning. So one example that I thought was really interesting is I used to, introduce a lot of really sexy, exciting things that I still believe in strongly are important, like registered reports, for example, and stuff like that. But with Reproducibility for Everyone, we added a whole module that was just on file naming and how to create an informative directory structure for your work. And I thought that was going to be so boring for everybody because it just seems really boring. But the thing is that most researchers have never been taught that. Majority of researchers have never been taught how to organize their materials in a reproducible way. And that was the module that we got in our post surveys as like the most impactful in people's actual day-to-day lives, was just learning how to organize their materials better. So that's just one example of like something that made it into this curriculum that I wouldn't have put in before because it just didn't seem attractive enough or interesting enough. So are there questions in the chat? I see that there's a notification there.
No,
no, that's just you saying, yeah, okay, awesome. So that's how me and a small group of colleagues to begin with started running these workshops at conferences mostly. So it was, at the beginning, it was mostly life sciences conferences. So we did, ASM microbe, we did like, some genetics conferences and that sort of thing. So what we were trying to do was to create this introductory reproducibility workshop that was about 90 minutes long. And the aim is to funnel people into all of these amazing projects that we like Jupyter Notebooks, like the Carpentries, like, what is Git, what is version control, like how do you use it if you're not a frequent coder, these sorts of things. So we were aiming to be the first touch to try and address some of those gaps in the core researcher training as it is right now. So I think it's important to mention that like, we know that this is not the solution to education and reproducibility. It's something that fills a particular gap right now. And what we all want to be working towards is having more of these things be a part of core researcher training over time, but it takes time for that to happen. And in the meantime, there are all these amazing projects out there that, some of them just have a hard time attracting researchers to their projects. They have things that are useful for researchers, tools and methods, and the researchers don't know about them. So that's kind of the funnel that we're trying to build here. So we run short workshops, half-an-hour workshops, sometimes 90 minutes is the longest. And we try and target large, naive audiences of researchers at conferences and large events, because then you can get 200, 300 people in a room pre-pandemic times. Now that we're doing them virtually, we get about 200, 250 per webinar. And the idea is that this is a way to introduce these large groups of people. And when we do it at a conference, we find that the people in the room are not already reproducibility advocates. A lot of them are very sort of like apathetic to start about the topic, but because they've already dedicated that time at the conference to learning, they're more likely to just drop into something. Rather than they would probably not have attended a reproducibility workshop at their institution while they were in their day-to-day job. So a conference is a magic time for reaching, a more diverse group of folks in terms of career levels and their, how they feel, I guess, emotionally about the idea of reproducibility, whether it's something they actually care about. You can actually get more people that don't care and hopefully turn them into people that do care. So that was our experience. We've had pretty good feedback from the start. And we also, as I talk about the content in the next couple slides, we're always improving the content based on that feedback that we get. So that's one of the advantages we have in being such a sort of lightweight project. It's really easy for us to just go and like, that module didn't work, chuck it, we're gonna do something different. This turned out to be really popular, let's expand it. So that's something that we've found we've been able to do with, focusing on just a really niche part of, this gap in training on reproducibility. So the content, and I can show you some examples of the content in a minute. It's all, created. It was created initially by, the first draft was by a small group of us who sort of started the project, but over time, every single group of volunteer co-instructors has made it their own. So they curate it based on the audience that's going to be there, and also based on their own experiences with reproducibility. So if somebody has like, this tool worked so well for me during my PhD, like they added in, and there's the instructors themselves have final say on the content as long as it doesn't violate any of our code of conduct rules. So that allows the sort of knowledge sharing side of it to just happen in a way that you don't see necessarily in some of the more polished, I think, workshops, because people are always speaking about their own experience and their own sort of perspective on reproducibility. So all of the content is modular. So they're generally like about 10 to 15 minutes for each topic. And it's all versionable. So everybody, they take their section and they update the version. And then the next group that runs a workshop can choose to either use, what we call the main deck, or they can take this updated version. We're working right now on making that a little bit less informal and actually having the versioning be more easily tracked because we're growing. So that way of versioning things is getting a little out of hand. So this coming year, we're going to start to have forking and collections of, the different flavors of our workshops as the people, curate the content. So we have, like I said, about 40 active volunteers right now, and they're there to help, new instructors get onboarded to learn how to run the workshop, to, practice the module if they want to, and to also have like any other way that they want to get involved, if they want to propose a workshop and that sort of thing. We have a team of volunteers that are ready to help with that. And we also, one of the things that, because we're so global, one of the gaps that our volunteers have pointed to repeatedly is the need for there to be introductory reproducibility materials in different languages than English. So they're already translating the materials into Greek and German. And then our plan in the next year is to do Arabic, French, Hindi, Mandarin, and Spanish. So one thing I think that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about the materials is that it's not just slide decks. We have speaker notes as well. So people actually can just take the materials and just they don't even need to practice. It doesn't have to be perfect. They can just read the speaker notes and the content is all there. So we have the template slides with the speaker notes. We have all the timings are all set out for everybody. We have transcripts available. We have videos available, so that people really don't have to feel like that they have to be experts in reproducibility to run one of these. They can just pick it up and run it. So what happens in a workshop itself is we have usually 4 volunteers, so that no one is doing a heavy lift because they're all volunteers and they don't have the time. And they each will take 1 or 2 modules. So each module, as you can see, these are the sort of core modules that get run regularly. We have 10, 15 minutes for each module. And then we have an Etherpad. So one of the challenges to trying to reach people at scale is, how do you have a workshop be interactive? How do you actually have real-time knowledge sharing of the participants when you can't really have, 200 people unmute and sort of like share their questions and stuff? So our solution has been this real-time text editing tool called the Etherpad. And so what we have for each section is, for example, here's data management. People can write their questions and also share their, tips and tricks here in the Etherpad. And the conversation gets really vibrant. And this is something that like we couldn't do on our own. Like, we're just four researchers with 4 experiences. And what you have is, 100 to 200 researchers with their experiences answering these questions as they come up. So people will ask like, well, what's a good electronic lab notebook for me? This is my workflow. And there's usually somebody there that has an opinion on that based on their own experience, and they can share that all in the Etherpad. And that also is a place for questions. So if we run out of time, we can answer the questions after the fact in the Etherpad, and the students can revisit it. So if any of you are involved in doing large trainings virtually right now, I really recommend trying out the Etherpad for a place of asking questions and knowledge sharing. And we also have a handout of resources. We have the pre-workshop survey where people say which modules they're most interested in, and we get a sense of their background and why they're attending the workshop. We use that information to customize what we actually present in the workshop itself. And then we have the post-workshop survey, which we use to decide, what's working, what's not, and which module should be expanded or updated. And we oftentimes will learn something from the Etherpad from a participant that ends up going into the curriculum, because then you're meeting 200 people, and they are going to know something you don't know. So that's one of the other ways that we're able to sort of improve the workshops over time. So this is an example of the materials that go along with a workshop. We have the pre-workshop survey is really powerful because we try and keep it short so we can have, like at a conference, in this case, we had almost 200 people fill out the survey in advance. And one of the things that we're able to see repeatedly is how common it is for people to have challenges reproducing their own research in someone else's. Is a super common problem. And when we root the whole narrative of the workshop in that problem, it really turns those people that didn't care about reproducibility into people that care pretty quickly. So we focus on those things that will benefit themselves first. And then we can take this information that we learn about our group, and we sort of like, we mention it multiple times in the workshop itself, so people feel like, they're kind of a part of this content that they're, that they're part of at the workshop. Okay. There's other stuff too. There's a handout that we do for every workshop that's updated based on, the discipline and that sort of thing. And this is something that the volunteers can just go nuts on, because it's all virtual, so it can be many pages long. So that's a resource that the participants have said is really handy, because they can go back to it in the future and try out, some of these cool tools that we know are useful. So are there questions? I'll keep checking. No questions?
There's one in the chat, yeah.
Oh yeah. I love the strategy to use short workshops and conferences. Do you have any information about long-term engagement? Do researchers keep learning about reproducibility after the workshops? So that is something that our funder would probably want to know. It's a really great question. So just like full information about us is that we only got funded a couple months ago. So up until recently, it's been all volunteer, like even I was volunteer, and now I'm, a paid coordinator for 2 years. And I think one of the challenges that we're going to have going forward is making that connection that you are asking about there, because we only have in our post workshop surveys, we have a question about, where's the post workshops? We never get as many people filling that out. We have information about, whether or not they intend to use, because it's 7. That was not very many people filled that one out. Whether or not they intended to use the tools and methods. We actually usually get a bigger response than 7, just so you know. But 80% of the participants report that they intend to use one of the tools or methods that they were introduced to in the workshop. And that was enough for us to get funded, but it's probably not enough for us to say that we actually have the evidence about people's behavior afterwards, because we don't actually have their, when we're running a workshop through a conference, we oftentimes don't actually have the contact information for the people in the workshop. The only people that have that contact information is the conference itself. So unless they're willing to send those people that registered a follow-up survey in the future, then we're kind of, there's not much we can do on our own. But that is something we're planning on doing, because there's several places that have, because of the demand, like we ran a workshop and the participants demanded it again the next year. So we now have repeat conferences, and those groups know us. So I think those would be the places to start to figure out like whether or not we actually have any change in research practices or not. So it's a really good question. And I guess like the honest answer is we don't know for sure. We only know anecdotally what people say they intend to do, and the fact that many of the participants end up becoming volunteers for us. So that's where most of our new instructors come from, is like they attended a workshop and then they ran a workshop themselves. Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Nothing in the chat right now. I do have a question about engagement and how folks can get involved, but maybe we want to save that till the end.
It's a good question, and I have a slide that's
perfect.
like exactly that. So maybe that's the segue for how to get involved is the next slide. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. The most common type of volunteer we have is someone who wants to run a workshop. So I say here, run a workshop or join a workshop, and that's because some people want to run a workshop at their institution, and they just want the materials and they're just going to run it, and we can help them get organized and practice and answer questions and stuff, but they're really kind of doing their own thing a little bit. And some people want to join a workshop that's already been accepted at an upcoming conference, and they just become one of those 4 co-instructors. And that's a really good way to get started, because then you only need to do, like, most people their first time, they do like 1 module, which is like 10 minutes. And there's so many, there's video examples, there's speaker notes. It's pretty straightforward. We try and make it so that anyone can just pick up any module and run it. And that gives them a sort of sense of what, the time commitment is for joining a workshop. In general, joining a workshop means you will have to do, you'll have to curate your slides yourself. So add any content you want, remove content you don't want. Join one half an hour planning meeting, usually, a couple weeks before the actual event, and then you need to attend the workshop itself. So it's really not like a huge time commitment. We try and keep it really minimal, because everyone's a volunteer. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, we have a little spreadsheet that just asks a couple questions, and then I'll email you, add you to the Slack group, make sure you have access to the Google Drive and that sort of thing. So that's like the bulk of the way that most researchers get involved. But one thing that I'd like to mention, because you guys are data scientists or involved in data science in some way, is like one of the things our volunteers are working on right now is expanding some of the data science like related parts of the workshop. We have a bioinformatics section, we have a data analysis and tools section, but we don't have the stuff that's related to those who are doing primarily computational work as like the core of their work. And we have lots of volunteers in our community that do that work, like that's their main work. So we're going to be creating a module to start with that focuses on that kind of work. And so if you are interested in sort of being involved in helping, look through that module, help with developing that module, that sort of thing, then just fill out that form or send me an email and I'll make sure that you're added to the Slack and we can, it's all very much like you do what you have time to do. If you, especially nowadays, if you sign up for something and then life overwhelms you, like we understand. So don't feel like you're, committing to anything if you reach out with some interest about any of these things. The other thing I wanted to sort of plant the seed about is a new thing we're working on. As an effort to be sustainable in the long run, we're not a great candidate for like a lot of funding because the work we do is not very sexy. It's just workshops, it's education. I know the power of it because I have been doing it for so long, but it is a challenge to get grant funding for it. So one of the things we're trying to do is partner with scientific societies, because that will lower our costs a lot. Because right now, sometimes when we get accepted to run a workshop, they require us to pay part or all of the registrations for the instructors. So we have that in our budget, but that limits how many conferences we can do. So our thought is we already have the Genetic Society of America agreeing to this, and a couple other groups are in discussion with us to be sort of our partners, where they get their logo on our website and our materials to say like they're a partner organization. And in turn, if one of our workshops gets accepted to one of their conferences, they get the fees covered for the instructors. So that's another way if you're interested in getting involved. If you are already a member of a scientific society, please, think about whether or not you would be willing to help us get in contact with somebody and see whether or not this type of partnership might be possible. Like, we're not asking you to make a sales pitch or anything. It's just kind of always good to come to the society with a member already. Yeah, so those are the main ways that I can think would be good ways to get involved. But we are, we're completely open source. Everything is CC BY, so you could pretty much do anything. Like if you want to, review our materials and give us feedback on them, like any of these things, if you fill out that form, that join us form, you can just say like, none of these things are the things I want to do. I just want to like, be there for feedback. I want to, tear your materials apart and tell you how they're wrong. Like all of these things are very welcome. Any questions? Yeah, that's all my slides.
Yeah, so do we have any other questions? I certainly have more questions, but I'll let our audience speak up if they'd care to.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's unmuting, so I'll go ahead. So can you talk a little bit more about what data science or data science kind of flavored materials exist, and relatedly, whether you've had groups of people in a research domain or kind of focus around a specific set of tools, kind of come in and build entire modules and chunks of content. Is that something that has happened? Is that something you would welcome?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we would welcome it. It really comes down to, like, the instructors themselves decide what goes into any particular workshop. So one thing I would say is that, like, if we do have people come and sort of build out a module, like a group of people build out a module focusing on a particular set of tools or workflow or something, it's really helpful to have that as an option. But if it's actually going to make it into a workshop, it's probably good to also talk to the other volunteers and sort of, get a little bit of their buy-in and make sure that there's always that connection made, that these are tools that are being used by people and they have seen the benefit, because that's the core, that's like the baseline of everything that goes in. And when those things are true, when people can see how it's relevant and it's useful, I don't see any reason why, like, volunteers wouldn't choose to put it in, because we have had the request for more computationally, like for computational reproducibility to be a larger part of the workshop. Right now we have of the sections that we have that are relating to computational reproducibility, electronic lab notebooks, not really, because it applies to everybody. But we have a bioinformatics section. Where is it? But because it's for a very general audience, it doesn't dive into like anything too complicated. So we talk about dependency hell. We talk about how you forget why you made certain analytical decisions. So we talk about documentation and literate programming, and we mentioned two of the more common, tools. We show people what a Jupyter notebook looks like. We talk about, how version control can help and how it relates to reproducibility. We talk about package management and version conflicts. We recommend Conda, and we talk about how to document your environment, like just the baseline of it. Like, I find that these are the sort of things that people that are using this stuff regularly don't realize other folks aren't getting trained on. So they don't know that they should be documenting what packages and versions they're using. And for infrequent programmers, which are like, when we're talking about a large group of just general researchers, they're mostly infrequent programmers. So just simple, like, there's these particular files that other people will look for when they want to know what your environment is. And so just a bit of an introduction into those. And we talk about containers, just a really basic, so people have it sort of planted, the seed planted, that this technology exists. And then we talk about Binder, because it's a very accessible way of getting started with container technology. So that's like the most of the computational like reproducibility stuff is that. Like, we also have a little bit about code sharing, which includes how to pick a code license. And we have a little bit on data analysis tools, but that's mostly about how to create reproducible figures and that sort of thing. So you can see, as you all are involved in data science, that there's a lot more that we could talk about, especially for those who are starting out with data science and you want to get them started with a reproducible workflow. But that module will likely be included in those workshops that are targeting that group, because I think it would be too advanced for a general audience of, let's say, like ASM microbe or something like that.
That's awesome. Do you have a place where kind of like half-baked modules live, or a list of wants that are out there in your community that we could access and take a look at?
I think, so the answer is no, we don't, because I think I sort of like touched upon this before, like since we started so kind of organically, a lot of the stuff about creating new content and versions and modules happened very informally. And it was all just through Slack, and people would just go ahead and make a new module and they would just add it. And then if it didn't work, they would take it out, which I did. I made a statistics module and it was just like, nope, this has got to go back to the workshop and we've got to figure out how to improve it. So that is one of the things we have on our roadmap, is to have really clear process for requesting new modules, for testing and reviewing modules, for people to be able to see what is in progress and join in on like different module development and that sort of thing. So it's something like the Carpentries has a whole system set up to do that kind of development. And we don't want to replicate that because that process is very long. And we're more of the like rough and ready, things go out, they don't work, we take them back, you know, but we still need to have that process sort of at least sketched out in order to get anywhere with the number of people we now have involved. Like when it was only like 20 people, it was easy to just, everybody just kind of knew what everyone else is doing. So one of the plans for this summer is to have that process documented and like out there. So if you're interested in doing any of that type of work, I would say the best thing to do is to just fill out that form or email me, and I can bring you guys in the Slack, and you can like we'll have a channel for that specific type of work. So even if you want to just lay low until, you know, that infrastructure is sort of built out, you know, that's one way to do that. But for now, it's like that's on the roadmap, but we don't have it built yet.
Great, thank you. Can you share the link again? Is it
yeah
bit.ly? I'll put it in the chat here. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and folks can email me with questions like later on if something occurs to you as well.
Awesome. Are there any other questions from the audience? No questions.
No questions.
Well, thank you.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I have a question for everybody here.
Oh, yeah.
As a, you know, since we just finished talking about how we do want to have this module about 10-15 minutes long, built out in the next, you know, 4 months, 6 months or whatever. If anyone knows of existing modules that cover some of these topics in an introductory way that are about that length, like it's always helpful to just have, like, not start from scratch. So that's something to keep in mind too. If any of you know of some good content that's openly licensed, like, let us know.
Perfect. Well, thank you for introducing us to reproducibility for everyone today. And folks have your contact info and the join link so they can get in touch with you if they'd like to, and we'll share this video around and have some conversations about what ADSA might be able to contribute.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I really loved meeting a new group. I haven't met you guys before, and I really appreciate the invite. So I hope everyone has a good day.
Yeah, you too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.